Migrantitization, a play in 5 acts. Prelude. This piece describes the travails of one migrant who took on various roles but remained a migrant nonetheless. And this play is made up of 5 parts: the internal migrant, the external migrant, the repatriated migrant, the exiled migrant, and lastly, we close with a reflection. Any coincidence to anyone, either living or dead, is purely coincidental. Internal migrant. Yes, I wanted to be older than the others, because I felt that they were just purely too immature. I wanted to be an adult. I wanted to get out of high school. I wanted to live somewhere else, no longer in suburbia. So how do you go ahead and reinvent yourself? You move somewhere else, where nobody knows you. You can take on any role you like, and nobody's ever going to question you in your new role. Yes, I know that feeling. I went through it earlier when I was a child. We moved from one town to another, and I left a school that I truly hated. I was being picked on continuously, and I had no friends. I was terrible in sports, and I saw no future. And then we moved to another town where nobody knew me, and I could take on any role I liked. And I did. I practiced sports. I practiced so much that nobody questioned whether I could play or not. Look here, all of a sudden, I'm on the team. Well, that's a nice feeling. I want that again. So I packed up my bags and I moved to another town, thinking that, yes, I could take on that role again, take on a new role, one where I could be whoever I want. But it didn't quite work out the way I planned. Just because I moved somewhere else doesn't mean that people are different. And in fact, they were as bad as the colleagues I had in high school. They weren't mature. I wanted to be older. I was serious. Well, maybe I just picked out the wrong place, that's all. So within a month's time, I realized I needed to pack up my bags and move again. But it wasn't that easy. I needed to figure out first where to go and take this process a little bit more seriously. The real question I needed to answer was, why did I want to be older than what I was at the time? Is it a case of where I thought life would be more meaningful? Or was it just simply boring and I thought that being older would make things more exciting? I still can't answer that question today. Was I standing up for something? No. Did I have an opinion of my own? No. Did I know with whom I wanted to associate? That one I knew. I was looking for the outliers, the people in society that didn't fit in. Why? I don't even know today. Probably because I thought they were more interesting. They were willing to risk something. They had something at stake, either by choice or by happenstance. And my interest in such people wasn't even cathartic. I didn't want to be like them, but I didn't know how to be like me. So I continued my journey. Was I fearless? I think I was rather calculating or calculated. But looking back, perhaps I was a little bit fearless. Most people thought I was fearless. In fact, they saw a side of me that I wasn't able to see in myself. Or maybe I did, and I was not able to recognize it. Looking at things in the past always changes the perspective and how you saw things to be, for either good or bad, or maybe it doesn't even matter. Maybe the real problem was that I wasn't able to be me because I didn't know what me was. I talked about fearlessness, and the real fear is trying to find things about yourself that when you find them, maybe you're not so happy about them. Maybe part of the problem was in that I was inventing myself over and over again externally, but internally, I always looked at myself as being the same. There was no escape. Everything was so easy. Why couldn't it be a challenge? On the one hand, others would say, that's a real challenge that you're taking up. But I never looked at it that way. And so the question is, was that a challenge enough for me? And was I willing to test it? Test to see if you can do it. And so it had nothing to do with me as an individual, but whether I can actually go ahead and add something to the list. What was I escaping? Maybe the escape was from myself and the ability to stand up for those things that I believe in. There was one problem, though. I didn't know what they were. So my stint as an internal migrant took me to various stations, and they were all easily mastered. So where was the challenge? I was still looking for the challenge, and time was running out. Soon I would have to make a decision. Do I fall in the path that everybody else follows in taking on a career and wearing a title that I had absolutely no desire to wear? Or do I take a different path? Phase 2. External migrant. Still looking for the escape. Hitting the escape key over and over and over again. Obviously, being an internal migrant wasn't enough. So let's push the boundaries, shall we? Maybe moving to a new country would be the challenge that I was missing. And I was fearful. Oh boy, was I fearful. Always trying to think, well, if this doesn't work out, what do I do after that? How do I contain the boundaries so that it doesn't matter, I could always go back? Escape key means being able to go back to the previous state where you started the journey from to begin with. Entering this new phase, I never wanted to admit that I missed anything from that of where I came from. But at the same time, there was plenty that I didn't agree with where I was at that time. And so this was a process I followed. This whole idea of how do I go ahead and assimilate into this new culture? Can I? Will I be accepted? Am I capable? I was used to taking on different roles, but this one would be quite different. As an internal migrant, I still had the culture that was part of me. As an external migrant, I felt I needed to throw that previous culture overboard and totally immerse myself in this new culture, because otherwise I will not be accepted. What does this mean? Does this mean that everything I had done up till that point in time was that bunk? Did it have no meaning? Did I have no meaning? Or maybe I wasn't able to recognize it. In the beginning, you have to think about everything, because there is no such thing as a routine. How do I go from A to B? How do I act? New language. How do I say these things? How do I react if I cock it up and people start laughing? What about my habits? Do they fit into my new environment? Or should I care? New feelings emerge. Now I start to feel resentment because maybe there are some things in this new culture I really don't like. Can't they see why this is so destructive, what they do? Of course, I'm not integrated. And the question is, what is integration? Does integration mean you are able to fit into society, that you're part of society, and that you throw everything overboard? Everything you've been up till this point in time? Eventually, you reach a phase where you're starting to feel you can actually master some things. You surprise yourself in some things that you do, and in reflection, you are actually proud of these accomplishments. So how do you push the boundaries? How do you become even more ingrained in this new society, the one that you have adopted, at least temporarily? Are you being accepted, or is that the real problem? Is the problem others, or does it lie in yourself? Are you able to accept yourself within this new role? Are you willing to acknowledge that of what you accomplished? And does it have meaning? Meaning for you? Because that's the only one that matters. Eventually, I reached a plateau. In the beginning of the story, I talked about wanting to be older than the others. Now I have reached a point where it was time to grow up, whatever that means. Realizing your abilities. Playtime was over, and it was time to move on, eventually to move back. Act 3. Repatriated Migrant. So now it was time to take the knowledge of that of what I was able to learn as an external migrant and turn it to my advantage. So I became a repatriated migrant and relished in telling the stories of how brave I was on my journey, a journey as a migrant, as an external migrant. There was one problem, though. People could not relate to these stories of bravery. They felt it was entertaining, but only for a short period of time. They could not understand what I did, why I did it, and what the value was. And then I realized, although I was back where I started, I was more of a migrant than I ever was. Although I was not capable of seeing the change had clearly taken place. And of course, for those individuals who did not accompany me on this journey, not only would they not have a clue what I was talking about, and they had changed as well, but not necessarily in the same way. We had different values. We had different interests. We had different aspirations. All starkly different. Was re-assimilation taking place? On certain levels, there was no choice. But is that what I wanted? Did I ever figure out what I wanted? This path I had chosen was still way too easy and not very fulfilling. And I knew why I never wanted to start with this path to begin with. What is a career? What does it mean? What does it mean for me? Who am I doing this for? So I continued the fight, but only internally. Externally, I played the role that was expected. Well, as best as I could. Still very frustrated that things were not as I wanted them to be, but what was I expecting? I felt I was on a path to mediocrity. What bothered me the most was that those years I spent as an external migrant was not only not understood by the people that I had known all these years, and the only ones that I could relate to were the migrants where I found myself to be at that time, because we had two things in common. We had the same values, and we all knew what it was like to be a migrant. Either you've been in that situation before, or you haven't. And if you've never been a migrant, then how are you supposed to know what it's like? Time goes by very quickly, and all of a sudden, the years are passing. So was this just another act of escape, similar to the others? Or was there something much more deep-seated? Something I couldn't recognize? Frustration was building, but I didn't know why. I felt that most conversations with people was just simply a waste of time. And time is still going by. And the routine was becoming asphyxiating. How do I stop this bus? I want to get off. So I came to the conclusion, I will always be a migrant, regardless where I live. So why don't I choose a place to stay where I felt more meaning? And it clearly wasn't where I started. So the choice was made. Time to get off the bus. The ability to stop the calendar from going pss, pss, pss. I don't know if I came any closer to understanding who I was, but one thing was for sure. I knew what I wanted, and I knew what I didn't want. And here I was making a conscious choice. And that was quite different than those in the past. Before, I would just continue on my merry way and make decisions, or better said, not make decisions, and go where I was able to go to. This time was different. Act 4, Exiled Migrant. So in comparison to earlier, this was not so easy to just go ahead and pick up my bags and go. It actually required planning. Oh boy, I had collected so much stuff I didn't even know I had. So it was time to free myself of these physical elements. It took me a year, and I didn't totally free myself. Much different than it was years back, where I was able to live out of a backpack. What had happened to me? Why did I need all these physical belongings? Were they part of me? Was this something that somebody else expected? Or is this something that we need the older we get, or have we convinced ourselves as such? Obviously, the more things you have, the less free you are, because you always have to take care of those things that you own. And that was another learning, getting ready to be an exiled migrant. How quickly we could become ingrained in routines without even realizing. And that was an important lesson. I used those learnings over and over again later on. The first time I had decided to become an external migrant, I don't remember how many goodbye parties I actually had. I had so many that people were asking the question, "Oh, I thought you already left, but you're still here." And the biggest lesson was after I had said goodbye, where I was working, ready to become an exiled migrant, I went back one more time to say goodbye and realized that it was like I had never been there. My chair, the chair I had, was already occupied. Some people didn't even bother to say hello, and I had only been gone for a day. What's the takeaway from that one? Either you're part of the group, or you're not part of the group. If you choose not to be part of the group, then you have to live with the consequences. Well, I had made that decision, and it was time to go. So the second time back was certainly different than the first. I already knew what to expect, or I thought I did. I felt I was already integrated in the society I had chosen as my home again, thinking that all I have to do is slip into this persona one more time. And then I started to realize those years back as a repatriated migrant played a very important role in a way that I couldn't realize. So is this part of me, these changes? And how do I deal with them? But this time back, it's certainly different in a good way for the most part. I was a different person coming back. I had experience I didn't have when I repatriated myself. My knowledge was much different, much greater, and my relationship to others had changed as well. Did I think this was the last station on that bus ride? I never felt that I was able to go back to where I started the journey. But where was it going to take me? And to what degree was that a conscious choice? If I felt that time was going by quickly before, now I put it into overdrive. Year after year after year, and changes are happening, but you're not conscious of them anymore, or that changes are not happening, and you're not conscious of that either. 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Boy, what did I do in those 10 years? Is that what I wanted? Did I put myself in a position where I had a choice? Or was I living under the illusion I had no choice? What about this role as a migrant? After so many years, are you still a migrant? Now I noticed the change. I felt less and less being a stranger because this was part of my routine. But the individuals I was dealing with, not all, but many, were not capable of looking at me any other way than being a migrant. And that started to bother me. I didn't feel like I was a migrant anymore. This was my home. I had made a conscious decision. For once, I actually made the decision. Every day I would get up and I wouldn't think about what I was doing. I felt I was completely ingrained in society, but I would still get the question, when are you going home? That meant that where I was, they did not see that as being my home. Was it home? I felt at home, but was it really my home? Then it struck me. There is no such thing as home. I made a choice many years ago not to have a home because I felt the home was too confining, that I felt the home was too boring, that home was not a challenge, and home did not allow me the freedom. But was that home's fault? Is that something that home imposed on me? Or was this an easy excuse? So then let's not call it home anymore. Let's call it where I reside, and in fact became truly a place where I resided. What I was doing was too big for where I was residing. So I was spending more time outside of home than I was inside home. And this all became part of my routine. All very normal. And the time keeps going by. All of a sudden, 10 years had become 15 years. 15 years had become 20 years. And this had all become one huge routine. Where was the challenge? Where was the challenge that motivated me earlier to become a migrant to begin with? Maybe the motivation was something not external, but completely internal. The external is just a stage where we continue to play our role in a way that either we expect from ourselves or is expected of us. Sometimes it's the same, and sometimes it's not. And what about that question that I couldn't answer earlier? Who am I, and what do I want? And what do I stand for? And what am I trying to achieve? Am I any closer to getting these questions answered? And why is it so important to have these questions answered? Is there a void? Is this something that others think of? I tend to think they don't. But then why do I think of them? Or maybe they have the answers. All I know is that I was starting to get very frustrated. That frustration I had, not quite the same, but similar to those years before I decided to become an exiled migrant. And this became all part of the journey where I realized that I had a choice all along. Act number 5, reflection. Now we have passed the 30-year threshold of being an exiled migrant. So what does it mean? Am I any closer to getting those questions answered, the ones that I was posing much earlier? Do I know why I choose what I choose? Is this a conscious decision? Does it have to be a conscious decision? Does everything have to be planned? Are routines bad? Is freedom always good? Now I've gotten to the point of where I don't know what it's like not to be a migrant. And the real difference is that I relish in this identity of being who I am, of being a migrant, and having an affinity, an immediate affinity, to anyone who has gone through even a remotely similar experience as mine was, in comparison to the way it usually works, where we run around with nationalities and flags and anthems. I belong to a country or a universe where we have no flag, we have no common language, we have, to a certain degree, common experiences, but actually they don't even have to be that common. Just because we have gone through this process allows us to appreciate the experience of others in a way that we could never realize previously. And so I relish in meeting migrants and knowing that there is an affinity I have to them without us ever exchanging a word or being able to exchange a word. This does not mean that all migration is the same. Mine was freely chosen. Some do not have that luxury. In fact, many do not have that luxury. And so the real question is, how do I take my experiences and explain it in a way that can be understood by others? And I'm not even sure of whether this exercise is futile. Futile in the respect that nobody can truly understand what an individual has gone through, being one part of the spectrum. Looking at it from the other side means we are able to understand a number of things if we allow ourselves to be open and understanding the human condition. Is it okay to reinvent yourself? What do you expect from yourself in return? What should others expect from you? Maybe the real freedom is the ability to shrug obligation, but not responsibility, two separate things. Shrugging the expectations of others, but not responsibility, again, two separate things. And the ability to be vulnerable, showing people your weaknesses because that's who you are. By showing your vulnerability allows you to relish in that of who you are, regardless where you come from, what you stand for, and where it takes you. That's what I've learned in 45 years of being a migrant. It allowed me to move the subconscious to the conscious and force me to be confronted with thoughts that I wasn't always happy with. But the reason why I did it and what drove me all the time was the thought that I had no choice. And with that, I finally answered the question, who I am, why I'm here, what I stand for, and what I strive to be, always. This was a production of Migrantitization, a play in 5 acts. Thanks for listening.